The next biogeochemical cycle that we're going to talk about is the carbon cycle. Carbon is one of the most important elements for life on Earth. As I mentioned in a previous video, if you were to remove all of the water from a living organism, most of the chemicals that you had left would be large carbon-based molecules. Your proteins, which is going to be the majority of what you have, is going to be carbon-based. Your DNA is carbon-based. Your fats, your sugars, a lot of your hormones, they're all carbon-based. Carbon is so essential to life, to organisms, that any chemical compound that it principally contains carbon is referred to as an organic compound. If you've ever heard one of your friends say, I'm studying organic chemistry, they're studying carbon-based chemistry. The water cycle was driven by two processes, evaporation and precipitation. The carbon cycle is also driven principally by two processes, but these are two biological metabolic processes, two chemical reactions that take place inside living things. The first is photosynthesis, and the second one is called cellular respiration. Photosynthesis can only occur in certain types of organisms. We call those organisms producers. Plants can do it. Plants are a kind of producer. Certain types of algae can do it, any kind of green algae. Certain types of bacteria are able to do it, but that's it. No animal can do photosynthesis. No fungi can do photosynthesis. This is a unique task that can only be done by certain specific types of organisms. And it is, simply put, the process of taking carbon dioxide from the air and water and taking the atoms in those two molecules, rearranging them in order to make sugar. Now, carbon dioxide and water are low-energy compounds. If you were to mix carbon dioxide and water together, try to light them with a match, you're not going to get any kind of reaction. Neither of those burn. In fact, water pretty notoriously puts fires out. However, if you were to take a pile of sugar and burn it, it would burn really, really well. Sugar, unlike those first two molecules, is a high-energy compound. So, there's a difference. Even though we have the same atoms, right? Sugar is just the same atoms but rearranged. There's a difference in energy. So we had to put energy into this system somehow. That energy in the sugar came from somewhere. And the energy was captured from sunlight. So photosynthesis uses light energy, sunlight energy, to change carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and water into sugar. We're going to use glucose as our representative sugar, and the chemical formula for glucose is C6H12O6. Chemical formulas just tell you what the various parts of a molecule are. So one molecule of glucose has 6 carbon atoms, 12 hydrogen atoms, and 6 oxygen atoms. So carbon dioxide is carbon and oxygen, water is hydrogen and oxygen, and sugar is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, right? So it makes sense that you could just take these two molecules and rearrange them to make this other molecule. You can take carbon dioxide and water and make sugar out of it. But if we do some accounting, down here we have the balanced chemical equation for photosynthesis. You'll see that it takes 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules, 6 H2O molecules, in order to make 1 glucose molecule. Now that makes sense. Each carbon dioxide molecule has only 1 carbon, and we end up with 6 carbons over here in the sugar. So it makes sense that we need 6 carbon dioxides in order to make 1 glucose. And, we need 12 hydrogens to make our sugar. So we need 12 waters because each water has 2 hydrogens. And then we need some oxygen, and both carbon dioxide and water have oxygen in them. How many oxygens do we have on the left side of the equation? Well, there's 6 carbon dioxides, and each one has 2, so there's 12 oxygens here, and we have 6 more from the water, because each water molecule has 1 oxygen. So 12 plus 6, we have 18 oxygens on the left side of this equation. Oh, but we only needed 6 oxygens in order to make a sugar, because glucose's chemical formula is C6H12O6. That meant we have leftover oxygen. So what do the plants do with all that leftover oxygen? What they do is they just pair those oxygen atoms up together and they produce O2. O2 is a waste product for plants, but this is the air that we breathe. This is the oxygen that we breathe in and that we use for our own metabolic processes. This, to me, has always been fascinating, that the oxygen that we desperately need to survive is fundamentally a waste product of photosynthesis. It's not the point of photosynthesis. The point of photosynthesis is to take carbon dioxide and water using the energy of sunlight and make sugar. But as a bonus, you get these oxygen molecules. And since the plant doesn't eat them, it just releases it out into the atmosphere. So that's photosynthesis in a nutshell. What's this other thing, cellular respiration? Well, you probably know that respiration has something to do with breathing in and out, right? So when you breathe in, you're breathing in O2, right? That's oxygen. Hey, that's the stuff that the plants just released for us, right? So you're breathing in O2. And what do you breathe out? You breathe out carbon dioxide. So if you look down here at the balanced chemical equation for cellular respiration, you can see that O2 in and CO2 is coming out. So it has something to do with regular respiration. We are bringing oxygen into our bodies through breathing, and we are pumping carbon dioxide out. Cellular respiration is essentially the missing link between breathing in and breathing out. It's what your body is doing, chemically speaking, that requires you to breathe in oxygen and breathe out CO2. And it's functionally the complete opposite equation of photosynthesis. So where do we get our energy from? Plants get their energy from sunlight, but where do we get our energy from? We get our energy from eating food. Any kind of organic molecule that we consume is going to give us some energy, but we know that sugars give us a lot of energy, right? That's a high energy compound. So we eat a lot of sugar, and that's here, the glucose on the left side of this equation is a high energy organic compound. So we eat that and we breathe in O2. And then our cells rearrange these atoms in order to make CO2 and H2O. So we break down that sugar and we turn it back into carbon dioxide and water. And remember what I said a moment ago, sugar has a lot of energy, carbon dioxide and water don't. So where did the energy that was inside that sugar go? It went into our cells. We got chemical potential energy for sustaining our life processes in the process of breaking down and digesting these sugars. And for nitty-gritty chemical reasons, that is only possible in the presence of the oxygen that we breathe in. So cellular respiration takes energy from glucose and puts it into forms used by the cell. Photosynthesis takes carbon dioxide and water, uses the power of energy, makes glucose and oxygen. Cellular respiration takes glucose and oxygen, breaks them down, and produces carbon dioxide and water, but releases cellular energy, chemical potential energy for our cells to be able to use and live. Now, while only certain types of organisms can do photosynthesis, all organisms do cellular respiration. So plants, they do both, right? They're not just making the sugars for us, they're using them themselves as well. Here I tried my hand at a little bit of animation. It's nothing too fancy here, but for those of you who are more visually inclined, on the left side of this picture, I have 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules. This is what carbon dioxide looks like. It's got a single carbon in the middle and 2 red oxygens on either side. And this is about what water looks like. It's got 1 big oxygen and 2 little white hydrogens here that look like Mickey Mouse ears on it. These are the starting components for photosynthesis, 6 CO2 and 6 H2O. These enter the plant. The carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, the water, which you would usually think about as being from the hydrosphere, but it's coming from the soil, so it's part of the lithosphere here, is going to enter the plant through the roots, and they become part of the biosphere once they become incorporated into the plant's tissue. And through biological processes, through photosynthesis, the atoms that make up those molecules get rearranged, and you get glucose, which is this long chain molecule with the 6 carbons in it, and then these 6 O2 molecules. And you can see, if you take a moment, you can take my word for it, but if you like, you can pause and take a moment to count up all of the oxygen atoms, which are the reds, all of the carbon atoms, which are the gray ones, all of the hydrogen atoms, which are the little white ones, and you will find out that there's the exact same number of carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens on the left side of the equation and the right side of the equation. Chemical reactions don't create or destroy matter, they only rearrange the chemical bonds. Now, if this was my Bio 100 or Bio 110 course, we would go into the deep, nitty-gritty details of exactly how photosynthesis is conducted. But for our purposes, there's two features that you want to understand here. One is that this is the way that energy is secured for ecosystems. All of the energy available to an ecosystem comes from this process, capturing energy from sunlight and putting it into organic molecules through photosynthesis. The second is that notice that molecules from the air and the water are being converted into sugars, and then those sugars are going to be used to make other organic molecules that allow the plants to grow. This is the raw material of plant growth. We refer to the total weight of living material as biomass. So the more plants grow, the more biomass they create. The energy from sunlight is allowing the plants to build up biomass, to convert non-living materials into living materials. So the energy and the biomass are related to each other. The more energy there is available to an ecosystem, the more biomass there can be, and the biomass is where the energy is stored in the biosphere. Now, what about that other process, cellular respiration? In order to understand how cellular respiration works, it's actually kind of helpful to think about a car by way of analogy. Here, you can see a molecule of octane. It says gasoline here, but gasoline is a mixture of different hydrocarbon compounds, and this one happens to be octane. Automobiles work via a combustion engine. So you put some hydrocarbons in your tank and give them a little bit of a spark, and they create an explosion, and that drives the mechanical parts of the engine in order to create motion, and then that motion of parts creates the movement of the car and it gets it working, right? And then what is the byproduct of that combustion reaction? Well, one thing is your engine gets really, really hot, right? All that waste heat gets generated. The usable energy is the combustion energy, the force that's driving the pistons, but it creates a lot of waste heat that's just sort of vented off, and you actually have to make sure that your car doesn't overheat because it can cause problems. But the other thing that comes out of this combustion reaction is carbon dioxide and water, as well as other compounds, methane and things like that come out of your tailpipe. Another important piece of information about how engines work is that you need to mix that fuel with oxygen, because without oxygen you cannot have a combustion reaction, just for the same reason that if you put a candle flame in an enclosed container, eventually it will snuff itself out. You need oxygen to have combustion. And that is because, chemically speaking, combustion is what we call an oxidation reaction. It is being driven forward by the power of oxygen. Oxygen is very greedy for making connections with other types of elements, so it is actually a really good catalyst for certain types of chemical reactions. Well, take a look at this food molecule in the diagram just below. This is a triglyceride, so it's got these 3 fatty acids coming off of it. And look at the chemical similarity between the octane molecule and these fatty acids. It's just chains of carbon and hydrogen. These fatty acids are functionally just hydrocarbons, like the gasoline that we put into the engine. And what do we breathe in? We breathe in O2, the same stuff that needs to be mixed in with the gas in order to get that combustion reaction. And this is because cellular respiration is also an oxidation reaction, and it releases energy from hydrocarbons in much the same way that combustion does. Albeit, because it's a metabolic process, it does it in a much more careful, complex, slow, and considered way. If we were to release all of the energy from our food simultaneously, we would just spontaneously combust. But at a fundamental level, these chemical reactions are very, very similar to each other. We get chemical potential energy for our cells out of this chemical reaction, and the byproduct of those chemical reactions is heat, which is part of the reason why we are so warm. Our metabolism generates heat. And what do we breathe out? We breathe out carbon dioxide and water. That's part of the waste that we create, because that's what's left over from these hydrocarbons and oxygen after the chemical reaction has completed. So after all of that and the analogy, what is cellular respiration? Cellular respiration is the process by which we take organic molecules in our food, so proteins and fats and sugars, and we break them down in the presence of oxygen at the cellular level in order to release the energy that's hidden within them. And the waste products that are created are carbon dioxide and water, which we then breathe out. That's cellular respiration. It's the way we get energy from our food. We consume biomass, and we breathe in oxygen in order to be able to unlock the energy inside. Now that we've talked in a little bit of detail about photosynthesis and cellular respiration, the actual steps of the carbon cycle are going to be relatively easy. Now, it's the carbon cycle, so we're only going to concern ourselves with the carbon aspects of these equations. So we're going to start out with CO2 in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide. We have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, a little bit too much at the moment, but it's there. And that's going to be pulled out of the atmosphere through the producers, plants, algae, cyanobacteria. They are going to, through photosynthesis, pull that carbon dioxide out, and they're going to incorporate it into sugars and other organic materials. And that's going to create biomass. The plants and algae and other producers are going to grow and add size to themselves, which creates a big reservoir of not only biomass, but energy available for the consumers to be able to eat. So the herbivores are going to show up, and they want to eat the plants. Because the herbivores are the first consumers to arrive to eat the plants, we call them primary consumers. They're the ones that eat the plants. So primary consumers get their energy needs by consuming producers. They incorporate the carbon in the biomass of the producers into their own biomass, and they increase in size, and they reproduce, they make more of themselves, and they thrive as best as they can. Then other consumers, which we call secondary and tertiary consumers, these are omnivores and carnivores, can eat the herbivores as well as maybe some of the plants, depending on what animal we're talking about. And they too are going to add to their own biomass and fulfill their own energy needs. The whole time the consumers, and consumers are just any organisms that need to eat other organisms in order to survive, the whole time that they're consuming biomass, they have to process it, and as they're processing that energy, they're doing cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is going to have as its waste product carbon dioxide. So they're breathing in oxygen, they're breathing out carbon dioxide, which is putting CO2 back into the atmosphere. And you might notice that on this chart, they also have drawn an arrow for cellular respiration coming from this fir tree here, because remember, the producers also do cellular respiration. Plants do both cellular respiration and photosynthesis. Now, not 100% of the food that those organisms take in is going to be breathed out through carbon dioxide. Some of it's going to be excreted as waste, and some of it's going to be incorporated into their bodies as their own biomass. But when they die, that material is going to be decomposed by bacteria and fungi that live in the soil, as well as like insects that help break them down into smaller pieces, and then bacteria and fungi can go to work breaking them down even smaller and return them into much simpler chemical states. This is called decomposition. The organisms that do this work are called decomposers. And so all that waste and all of the carcasses slowly break down, and they return into the soil layer. So now we have the lithosphere involved as well. We have the atmosphere, the biosphere, and the lithosphere. This not only creates a nice nutrient-rich soil, but decomposition also creates carbon dioxide and methane and other gaseous carbon-based compounds, which then go into the atmosphere and completes the cycle once again. So there's this constant interchange of photosynthesis pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and cellular respiration and decomposition processes putting it back in. If the amount of photosynthesis is exactly equal to the amount of cellular respiration in an ecosystem, then the total amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will not change whatsoever. Now, number 5 on this chart shows burning, and it mentions fossil fuels. And you'll notice that this doesn't actually seem to be part of the cycle. And the reason for that is fossil fuels like coal and oil and natural gas came from materials that were secured away in deep rock layers 65 million years ago or longer. functionally, they were not participating in this exchange of cellular respiration and photosynthesis anymore. That was carbon that was removed from the carbon cycle and sequestered underground, locked away underground. But what we've done is unearthed that material, and we've been burning it and then dumping it into the atmosphere without increasing any process like photosynthesis that would remove it from the atmosphere. In fact, we have been cutting down large sections of natural ecosystem, large sections of forest, destroying large wetlands, which would be doing the bulk of the work of photosynthesis. So we've decreased the amount of photosynthesis while increasing the input of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And that is part of the reason why the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has been trending upward at a steady rate since the Industrial Revolution. So how do humans affect the carbon cycle? By burning lots of fossil fuels and adding substantial amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, carbon that was formerly not participating in the carbon cycle whatsoever. It was safely secured away in rock layers. And clear-cutting carbon-absorbing vegetation from many forests faster than it can grow back, unsustainably harvesting woodland. We'll have an entire unit later on that's specifically about air pollution and climate change and the effects of the accumulating CO2 in our atmosphere, so for right now we'll just continue talking about the other biogeochemical cycles.